Imagine you're there in the woods, stumbling around lost, when you turn and see it, a tall white flash, glowing red eyes, and a blood-curdling scream that can only mean one thing. Horror among horrors, you have somehow stumbled into Alabama!
Horror!
I should have recruited someone from Georgia or Florida for this to get some good hate on Alabama, because I just don't have it. You want someone to make fun of Utah or Kansas, I'm your girl. But I honestly have given Alabama more attention this week than I have my entire life. And now all I know about it is that it's got a weird cryptid. I'm sure someone somewhere thinks that's very on point. Let's talk about Alabama's white thing. So I actually mentioned Alabama's white thing briefly in my Bigfoot video when I was talking about how different places, both in the States and internationally, have their own versions of Bigfoot. And that's kind of what white thing is, and also not at all what it is. So white thing has been described as a hairy upright beast, somewhere between 7 and 8 feet tall, but it runs on all fours and is able to climb trees and fences. It's been described as having glowing red eyes and no eyes at all, and it's been described as having the body of a lion or kangaroo with a cat's head. So basically the only consistent thing about white thing is that it's all white. But there might be some explanation for that. One is that it's a shapeshifter, or even though there have been plenty of sightings, there hasn't been any attacks or close-up encounters. It seems like white thing isn't that interested in interacting with people. And that tracks with where sightings have happened. For starters, they happen in Alabama, the American Amazon. The state has an incredible amount of biodiversity and millions of acres of forest taking up over half of the state. It's a good place for an animal to hide, and a lot of sightings have been in the woods and in caves, which also makes sense since the state is a caving hotspot with thousands of caves in the northern part. The majority of the sightings, though, have been concentrated in Morgan, Etowah, and Jefferson counties, which is kind of funny. White thing has so much space to hide, and it likes to hop around the areas between Montgomery and Birmingham.
Well, it's all about life in the big city.
But there may be method to that madness, because white thing does make its presence known. There have been countless sightings since it was first spotted in the 1940s, so much so that there's an entire Facebook group dedicated towards sightings of white thing. And even people who don't see it know white thing is there, from its gag-inducing scent and its scream like a woman in distress. But is white thing real? Well, as I always say, I don't know. People have speculated it's everything from a white dog to a bear or cougar suffering from albinism, or it could be something unclassified. It's only been spotted since the 1940s, which is old, but not unrealistically old for an animal to live. There's no reason it couldn't be an albino Bigfoot or a distant cousin of Bigfoot. My guess would be a creature with albinism, because it wouldn't make sense for an all-white creature to exist naturally in Alabama. The state isn't known for snow, so having white fur would make it stick out and make it more vulnerable to predators or easier for prey to spot. And it's that speculation that brings me back to writing. And there's a lot of writing inspiration you can get from white thing. The first goes back to the fact that whatever it is, there's a fair chance it's suffering from albinism. Species are not binary. There's always going to be diversity in them. And that's important to remember when you're dealing with any fantasy race, be it an elf, a unicorn, or aliens. No matter what you're writing, you can and should add some diversity, especially if the fantasy race has a bigger role in your story. It will help the race and the world feel real. And if you have a single member of the race taking a bigger role, give that individual diversity like albinism, height, weight, extra or fewer body parts. Will help make it memorable and will help your audience distinguish them from the rest of the race. But you do have to be careful not to fall into the trope of giving characters of color blue eyes. Genetic diversity can be a fine line between making a character memorable and offending someone who's a different race than you or disabled.
You're different, and I don't like you!
There's also something to be said about white thing and folklore. White thing is one of the most popular cryptids in Alabama, and if the Facebook group is anything to go by, it's had a big impact on Alabama's people and culture. I'd put a link in the description, but I don't have Facebook.
Facebooked it on Facebook.
If you're writing a modern story, white thing is a great place to get inspiration on how to combine a modern setting with folklore. And you should include folklore in your story even if it doesn't make it to the final cut. Including folklore is a great way to make the world feel real and flesh out a culture. White Thang and Bigfoot say a lot about humans and our culture, what we believe in, what scares us, and what our world looks like. White Thang, real or not, couldn't exist in a place like New England, which has a far denser human population, or Kansas, which has more farmland and is far flatter with a lot less biodiversity than Alabama. The fact that a Bigfoot species, especially one that may be unique among its own species, exists in Alabama says a lot about how expansive the nature of the state is. So keep in mind what different areas of your world look like, and come up with or steal cryptids and other folk tales to help reflect that area. And once you do that, you can use that folklore to help develop culture for the people who live there. What do they believe and why?
It's classic Slavic folklore, Panda.
And folklore can also say a lot about your characters. Which characters believe wholeheartedly in cryptids and other folklore? Which ones believe only in what they can see? How do these ideas clash? If you're writing a magical world, which characters come across as more crazy? The person who can summon fireballs who believes in ghosts? Or the person who can summon fireballs who doesn't? And is the folklore you come up with for your world even real? I don't know if White Thing exists in our world, but it could very well exist in the one you come up with. And if it doesn't exist, why not? All these questions are great ways to get to know your world and your characters. So go and read through that Facebook group about White Thing, and don't forget to read and write. Hey, so I wrote a book and I put it up online. It's a high fantasy story with evil kings and arranged marriages and an avatar-inspired magic system. And if you find that interesting, you should go to Wattpad or Scribble Hub where I post a new chapter every Sunday.